Wizard Magazine, number 22, June 1993. My name's Ed Piskor.
My name is Jim Rugg.
First Joe Q appearance on the cover, man. There will be several more of these down the road.
Yeah, he sort of becomes Bart Sears 2.0 in that he does a lot of covers for Wizard.
He's going to get some coverage on the interior too, man. And he is a darling of Wizard as the days go by, man. So that's worth noting that this is his first real big treatment with them. And if you ever read Marvel Untold Stories book, they suggest that a lot of where Marvel is right now is because Joe got involved with Marvel by way of Wizard. It was all Gareb Shamus like hooking them up because Quesada had all this Hollywood access.
That's interesting. Whenever he was hired, starts out with Marvel Knights. He's an interesting figure. I'm glad that we're starting to see some coverage of him because of the influence he has certainly, put into the comics industry. It's remarkable the influence he's had as Marvel's coming out of bankruptcy in the late 90s and he starts working for them in more of an editorial role. I don't think anybody anticipated the success Marvel has had. And, he's been there for virtually all of it.
Yeah. We're jumping ahead. Let's take a look at this Youngblood Bloodshot. At first, I was very excited. Oh, man, this is going to be some bleeding edge. They don't quite have the Deathmate name put together yet. But when we go check out some later ads, we see that the Deathmate thing is there. You know what always struck me as being kind of odd with this image, man? Chef never had this thing. I don't even know what Rob was thinking. It's he created the characters, but how come Chef never had this little samurai bun in the comic ever?
I don't know. I would be curious where that even comes from. What influence puts this hairstyle into Rob's lexicon. Good Bloodshot, though.
I think so, too. Bloodshot has never looked cooler.
Never.
So boring in those Valiant comics.
I like the headband on Badrock. That's a strange choice. Is his Rocky form prone to sweating?
Well, if you remember, Badrock is a 9-year-old boy or something like that, so he maybe watched Rambo.
Just looks super cool.
Q unit? O unit? What letter is that, Jim? One thing I do know is that Carl Alstetter and Robert Napton will be future Extreme Studios guys. So it's this trade magazine is really there for Rob to poach people he thinks are going to be the next, who would be the guy, Dan Panosian, perhaps. We're going to be talking Harris Comics more later, though. And there it is, Deathmate Black, man. It's going to be the first appearance of Gen 13. That's the noteworthy thing about that.
Super on board for that one, too.
The Image ones, red and black, yeah, you get those, man. The blue one and the gold one, that's your daddy's comics, man. When you talk the alpha and omega of Jim Shooter comics, the Kayfabers can see exactly what you mean by that by checking out the entire Deathmate brand. In Gareb's editorial, man, he's just trumpeting the success of the Max 1/2, man. And he said that, yeah, big response, man. You'll get your Max 1/2s. Might take a little while.
I did make a note of that. You just can't do an Image book without it being late, even if you're Wizard Magazine.
In the Magic Words column, one letter that kind of was near and dear to my heart were these boys who are about 15 years old, man, who can't get Spawn comics in Australia because there's been TV programs talking about how sadistic and violent the comic is, particularly issue number 5, which has that Billy Kincaid character cutting off children's fingers and gluing them to the wall of his ice cream truck, only to get his comeuppance a little bit later in that issue, man. It made me think about how, the obscenity police, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund exists for a fucking reason, and every retailer I know has their own stories about vice cops coming in trying to act like civilians, but that gig is so fucking gross and desensitizing that these people try to see obscenity and pornography in everything. That just struck close to home because the guy who responds to the letter says, listen, man, there are stores here in America where you're not going to be able to find Spawn because of the proprietor's whims.
There's an article in this issue, and it's about religion in comics. And Spawn is comes from Satan. I can see that this would be, in certain areas, this would be troublesome to maybe some parents or whatever. I'll point out this letter. This is from a woman defending her husband as a comic book collector, because there's a lot of past letters, a lot of these letters refer to previous things. And she's talking about whenever she, and her husband first got together, that the comic collecting was a little bit weird to her. But they had a daughter with a learning disability who sort of followed her dad around and took up the comics collecting bug and helped her learn to read. And at this point now they own and operate a comic book store in Colorado. So it's kind of this happy story about a comic collector and the positive influence that's had on his wife's life, on their daughter's life, and on their family.
That's so cozy, man. Let's go get to the blood and guts. Wizard News, Malibu unveils the Ultraverse. In this piece, there's a lot of amazing kind of verbal kung fu in here, describing the creation of the Ultraverse. And they say, like Image Comics, we have a, quote, we have a creator-controlled universe of characters that we're building here. Notice they don't say creator-owned.
Let's also think about creator-controlled. Who's writing and drawing Marvel Comics? Who's writing and drawing DC Comics? Show me the comic that's not creator-controlled. That's ludicrous language.
I gotta say something, man, because some of the people caught up in this nonsense is Steve Englehart and Steve Gerber. And, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. And it's like the paradigm has shifted, and we've seen a workable model that is highly, highly successful with the Image guys who own, control, run their whole own operation. So when I see Steve Englehart's name, now I've never met these dudes. Steve Gerber's name, who was a big proponent of creator rights, owning his stuff, famously wrote the Howard the Duck comic that he said when at the height of that thing, if he would have even had one comp copy to sell at the early kind of comic book convention days, for that the price he would have gotten for that one issue of selling it to a retailer, he would have made more than he made writing the damn comic. And he just is going to be a part of this. That speaks volumes to me because I know a lot, I get to meet a lot of my heroes. And unfortunately, they seem to like to complain more than affect change. So once again, these guys putting themselves in position to get jacked. And they have no excuse because we now, at this point, 1992, 93, we live in a world where the creator can control their thing, man. So they have no fucking excuse.
I wonder about what kind of royalty, if there is a little bit of a creator-owner stake in this. Not something that would give them control, but if there is a better deal from a creator standpoint than what Marvel and DC were offering at the time. We don't get into that in this news section, but there must be something exactly for the creators that you cite, Ed.
We know what's going to happen. Malibu is going to sell these Ultraverse characters and stuff to Marvel down the line. We're going to keep a fucking hawk eye on this when we cover that stuff and see if there's any inkling of language where the creators of all these characters prosper from the thing, or if it's just Dave Ulbrich and Chris Ulm. And it's what? It's Prime, it's Prototype, it's Exiles.
They have a lot of language, too, about, they'll have different artists who are creating the visual look of the books, but that's not who's drawing the book. And that's kind of... It stood out to me. I don't know that books always work that way, where you would hire, Merritt Michaels to design the look, but then somebody else is drawing it. And the reason I call attention to that is, from an artistic standpoint, artists have sort of things that they're good at, that they're best at. And so I don't know how well it would work that somebody else would design the character, and I know that's how it works with licensed characters. I'm not going to get to draw Spider-Man based on my design if I go work for Marvel and draw Spider-Man, but this is a little different because they're new characters. You would think that you would sort of the artist of the book maybe determines the look of the characters, playing to that artist's strengths.
The people who are creating these characters, they're the A-listers. So it's just, in my mind, it's just Malibu's way to get Dave Gibbons' name on one of their comics. What did he do? Oh, he put shoulder pads on this figure. You know what I'm saying? I think that's it.
I think it's also speed. They're probably assembling these creative teams on the fly while they're writing this press release. And so, right, if you can get Dave Gibbons' name in the press release, awesome. Yeah. We know that he's popular, even if he's not drawing a book. But who knows who's going to draw that book, because we're putting that together as fast as we can because we want these books out in the marketplace right now while this bubble is in full expansion.
I'm going to handle this one, and then I want you to handle that one, man. So, Shooter's Return, a Defiant Act, right? Past couple of ads, we saw the advertisements for the first Defiant comic, which is going to be called Plasm. And we know that when this comic came out, it's called Warriors of Plasm. And I did a little Googling, man, to see, to read up on Defiant. I have one issue of Warriors of Plasma. I don't have one other Defiant comic. And I discovered that Marvel UK sued Defiant because they had a character called Plasmer. And Shooter fought it. Now, Shooter got a consortium of people to pool money together, so he's not using the money from his bank account. He's using all this money to do it. Comic comes out, Warriors of Plasm. The court rules in Shooter's favor, but at the tune of $300,000 of the Defiant coffers. No more Defiant in 1995.
A preferred cover. This is Continuity's Valerie the She-Bat. Neil Adams is doing this comic, and issues like 3 and 4 are supposed to have a Spawn crossover. I've been looking for this Spawn crossover issue for a while now. Some Kayfabers have informed us that issue doesn't exist. So I'm scratching my head, right? This gimmick cover is supposed to have fur on it for like issue number 2.
Let me stop you real quick. Not just fur. Glow-in-the-dark fur.
Even better fur. So I start digging around because now She-Bat's really on my want list. And whenever I looked it up on my comic shop, it's like issue 1 is available and issue 5 or 6. And there's a note that those issues 2 through 4 never printed, don't exist, weren't published.
But 5 came out.
Yeah.
So weird, man.
So weird.
Milestone comes out. Hardware number 1 sold 300,000 copies, man.
That's a damn strong start. And good for Milestone. We've been talking about them lately, so I've been doing some research and watching them. They end up publishing around 300 comics, which is pretty remarkable at this time. I wonder if that's more issues than Ultraverse ends up producing. But good for them and a good, strong start.
A lot more coverage of them coming soon. How about this comic company that includes condoms with their production?
Yeah, this is tied to Omega 7 publisher, which is part of the Anaya publishing group that we've mentioned a couple of times now. That group isn't together very long, but I'm enjoying seeing these pieces of news about them because historically, that's a company I'm learning about, or at least a group of companies and publishers that I'm learning about. So interesting to see their promotional efforts.
This is pretty interesting. Look, it's like Ultraverse, right? But it's Easter Island Head, man, which will be synonymous with Legend in a couple of issues.
Thunderbolt comic winners announced. Thunderbolt Awards we covered probably 10 or 12 issues ago in the editorial section. This is a group of online fans who, basically it's an online award.
Uh-oh, who got Best Penciler?
Wonder if they actually drew a comic this year. They make this note. The guy, this is Patrick Daniel O'Neill, and we're going to talk more about him, the editor of Wizard. We'll talk more about him coming up. But he makes the comment about, you'll notice there aren't many hot titles here because the participants are somewhat older and are more discriminating in their taste.
He said the same shit the first time.
I want to call him out on this. This is a strange attack considering you're writing a magazine aimed at comic book fans, right? So it's strange to condemn a big chunk of the comics, especially the ones you cover. But furthermore, don't award yourself too much because Love and Rockets isn't on this list, and it's better than any of the award winners on this list. This is a bunch of old people who like DC Comics. That's it. Don't call it discriminating. Call it what it is. You're an older group of fans who like older style comic books. Nothing wrong with that, but that is what it is.
Can we continue our Patrick Daniel O'Neill diatribes in a second?
Yes, after we admire this Mark Texeira Union artwork.
I call these guys Image Generation 2.5.
Okay. I won't argue with that.
All right, Patrick Daniel O'Neill, man. I understand that you were one of the first day one subscribers to our YouTube channel. And it's a great, Dan Clowes said in many of his late interviews of the past couple of years is, when you give an interview, when you put something on the record, it kind of solidifies you in time and it almost makes you accountable. People think you still think those thoughts. So right now, Pat, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and just think that this is like a cornier, younger version of you, though you might have been 41. Let's get into it, man. So at the top of the article, one question that he receives a lot is, what do you do with the comics that you don't keep? And he says, I used to sell it back to a comic shop. I don't do it anymore. Peter David will give his comp copies out to kids in their Halloween baskets. But a lot of comics that I read can't be given out that way.
Spawn.
So I just recycle them. Once again, talking about gimmick covers for about 2 paragraphs. he's tired of them. He doesn't want them anymore. And my thought was like, why would you have any opinion on them?
Yeah, don't buy those. It's the easiest thing in the world, right?
Exactly. And then he's showing off his to-read list.
Let me say something else about gimmick covers. If the comic book inside that gimmick cover is good, I bet you're not complaining about the gimmick cover and don't care. The problem is, it's a gimmick cover, you buy it, and then the comic inside sucks. It's a bad comic. It doesn't matter if it's a gimmick cover or not. If it's a bad comic, it's a bad comic. That's really maybe what we should be complaining about.
Well said. So what's on the top of Pat's pile of comics to read, man? Sandman, the Superman titles, Incredible Hulk, Justice League of America, and Eternal Warrior. What has he lost interest in? Spider-Man books, Avenger books, Green Arrow, Shadow Man, and Fantastic Four.
And I have no problem with any of that. Like what you like, don't like what you don't like. Cool.
Never read, never will.
Here's where we get into some dangerous ground.
You always look like a dumb fuck.
Never say never.
When you talk absolutes, man. Any Lobo title.
That hurts me personally, but I'm willing to let that one slide.
Well, he also says any Venom title.
I kind of agree with him on that.
Here's the big one, man. Japanese manga. I should qualify this by saying that I do read stuff for the purposes of covering it in Wizard, but not necessarily because I enjoy it. So he says he condemns an entire country's worth of comics.
This is such an ignorant statement, because where is there a more developed comics industry, especially at this time, than in Japan? There are comics for every taste, every age level, gender, whatever you're interested in, there is a comic available. The visuals of manga are as sophisticated as any comics I've seen ever anywhere. This is an insane... There's no grounds for a comment of this sort. At this point, we have seen things like Lone Wolf and Cub. Akira's the big one, because Akira issue 34 is noted in this comic. So, like, we've seen Akira. Do we need to say more? But there are other manga that have come out and been translated in English that are exceptional comics. And to make this statement, it seems irresponsible for a guy in his position.
Absolutely.
If you don't want to read manga, don't read manga. If you're the editor of a comics magazine, I just don't know why you would make this statement.
It's like Siskel and Ebert saying that they're not going to review movies, or they don't watch movies that have a subtitle, or, I don't like black and white movies, so we're not going to cover that at all. Patrick, you look like a fucking idiot right here.
Especially whenever your sign-off is next to a picture of Garfield.
Yeah, how's your Jim Davis collection going, schmuck? Maximum Carnage, Maximum Excitement, Maximum Spider-Man. Never read an issue of it, but I played the video game. Goddamn fun.
I can see why he's lost interest in Spider-Man.
Chris Claremont returns with the right stuff, man. This is probably the third Claremont interview that we've covered on our Kayfabe magazine commentaries, man. And the bulk of this is really promo stuff, man. He's got a Aliens vs. Predator comic coming out, a 12-issue series. And then they talk about some other smaller works, like there's going to be an Elseworlds Superman Wonder Woman series. Now, this magazine takes place in 1993. That Elseworlds series doesn't see the light of day until 1996. That's the front part of this thing. It's been a year since he's been on an X book, and he's pretty candid here, man.
Very critical of ex-editor Bob Harris.
In fact, I would say that there's some amazing passive-aggressive promos that are cut on him, man. When he equates Bob Harris with the DC equivalent at the time, who probably would have been Mike Carlin, the guy who was the editor of the Superman titles, and Chris says something like, well, I've heard that Mike Carlin is able to develop quote-unquote positive relationships with his people. But he described that the Bob Harris regime, once he came into effect, it almost took comics back 50 years, like the Mort Weisinger, Julie Schwartz era, where the writer is really just a vestige of the editor's hand. You come in, Mort Weisinger tells you we're going to do a story like this. Now you have to go be the brain in a jar to make that happen.
He goes on to talk about kind of the comic scene as a whole.
Yeah.
And what he sees. And he says, problems at Marvel, a lot of it is overloaded editors. Mm-hmm. Like these guys are doing so much, they don't have as much time to focus on maybe the creative part. It's just getting this stuff scheduled and out and in the door on time and making crossovers work.
Chris Claremont created an entire wing on the Marvel House of Ideas.
Yeah. And
he has some ideas about what he wants to happen in the comics, and he stresses that because of their overload, they don't have time to, and they won't take the time to play around with egos. so he felt that the best thing to do was just to split.
Yeah, he describes it as comics have really become short-term. You know, they want results and sales right away, and also that it's brands over creators. And I agree with him on that. You know, another way to say it is like a lot more people know Spider-Man than they do Stan Lee.
And it's this way today. Replace crossovers and stuff like that with like stunt casting, or basically the move is do whatever you can to try to get some ink. So that's what they're in the move for. It's a very short term. They're going to get a lot of press right away. But now you have to make a good comic to sustain this readership.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that happened.
He gets into Image and his experience with Image. You know, he was going to be a writer that was associated with Image early on. That didn't work out, but he doesn't seem bitter about it. He describes Image and their move as commendable, you know, quote unquote commendable. I thought that's interesting because we've seen so much backlash against Image. So I thought it was pretty stand-up to see longtime X-Men writer, super success writer, say, yeah, man, cash your chips out, own these characters, you know, own all of this yourself. Pretty interesting. But then he talks about kind of his trial and why Huntsman didn't come out. You know, not getting an artist attached is you can't overcome it if you're a writer. And he said something that I found interesting. If you're an artist and you're putting together a book for Image at this time period, all of those materials are basically a trading card set, which will subsidize the creation of that first issue. You know, because, and you see it, we'll see pages and pages of ads for trading cards. Everything's a trading card. And I'd never thought of that at the time, but it's pretty interesting that, like, that was one more pretty good revenue stream that these guys had access to.
And some of the things he talks about to go along with what you said about the artist-driven medium or the artist-driven business of Image Comics is how Todd McFarlane has gotten Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman and Frank Miller on the horn to write some comics for him, and he says, like, listen, I would like to get Todd McFarlane on a Chris Claremont comic, but why would he ever do that? Like, that's the thing that I love about Claremont. He's super realistic, man.
Yeah, the interview kind of ends with him saying he'd rather write books. You know, this call out is comics for the freelancer seem to be more about deal making than story making.
Yeah.
And this is something, you know, we covered a pretty good interview with him in the Comics Journal where he unpacks some of the nuts and bolts behind his career and where he was at the time. And it feels like you remove the big mechanism that is Marvel, and if you're a freelance writer, you're in a tough spot. You know, it's hard to make all of this stuff work from a writer point of view in this sort of new comics frontier. And he kind of alludes to that, you know, there at the end. It's been a year since X-Men. It's been kind of rocky. And, you know, as a writer, maybe you're further ahead writing books.
There is another quote like worth mentioning, because the guy did put 17 years of good service into creating those X-Men. And he says, I look at the X-Men and I think, this is my entire working life, and it's taking them 18 months to gut it like a fish. And boy, I can't imagine like how heartbreaking that must be, because the chasm between the Chris Claremont X-Men and those fucking jobber douchebags it's a big gulf, man. And it's like it turned me off of mainstream comics when I was a boy, man. Like,
yeah, you can trace my movement from the Marvel DC spinner rack to alternative comics. This is a big chunk of it. Not just the guy that I liked all these comics from seemed to have been kicked to the curb unceremoniously.
Yeah.
But then trying to read those comics that followed, it was like, I don't know any of these characters. Like instantly they just became whatever.
Joe Q, Comicdom's rising star, talks about his work from The Ray to Batman to X Factor. In an earlier Wizard, we showed off Ray number 1. One thing that struck me about reading this interview, several things, actually. One, I really love his confidence as a creator. He says stuff like, yeah, I want to make X Factor like the best X title there is. And he talks about some of the future work he has in the hopper, man, and he promotes it rather than the self-effacing, you know, indie comics kind of...
That's a good point.
Kind of thing.
Let me say something about X Factor before we move on. He talks about Peter David leaving the title, and the reasons very specifically is that the crossovers were just detrimental to his writing, you know, and Claremont mentions the same stuff in the previous interview with Claremont, you know, some of these like hardships as a writer. So it's not something we spend too much time on here, but it is mentioned. Like Peter David was a highly respected writer at this time. Quesada was happy to be on a book with this guy who's a really good storyteller. And the guy left. Like, he was on X Factor for a year, and just the hassle of trying to like curb your story, change the writing so that it lines up with whatever the crossover du jour is, was enough for Peter David to say, I'm sure X Factor sold enough that it was a nice royalty check, but it wasn't enough to overcome the hassle of like, well, wait, I have a story, now I have to change it to this crossover. So
one of the things that I've seen is throughout the earlier issues where we would talk with Peter David is the guy has his own set of like integrity. He stopped other books because he didn't like kind of the editorial malfeasance or whatever, man. And he just split from the title because it's his name on the writing credits, man. It's not his name plus editor or whatever, man. Another thing that struck me with this early 90s Quesada interview is he really put his stamp and created some characters that are indicative of that time. They are highlight characters from this era, man. Azrael, people loved Azrael. Talk about X Factor. That character Random, we cut promos with the little sphincter gun, but that is a lot of people's favorite characters, man. And one of the things he's alluding to is, he always wanted to work on Batman, yada yada. They're asking him about like what are some of the things you're going to be doing with a Nightfall storyline. He'll end up creating those very Transformer-like Batman costumes, man. And then in the future, he'll have created Ninjak for Valiant, and then that's another character that people really loved, man. So he created these characters. Now, they didn't really stand the test of time in the way that he hopes in some of these, in the article where he's like, I'm going to create a character that lasts, that's around for a long time. But these characters had a solid 10 to 15 year run where people were really, really stoked on them.
And Ninjak still is out there. And I had a commission for a Ninjak a couple years ago at Heroes. So like, there's still Ninjak fans. I do like, your note, Ed, that he's kind of ambitious. He's sort of aiming for these things and going for it. And it's something that at the time didn't register with me, but looking back on it and seeing where his career has led, there's groundwork here. It's an interesting story he tells about how he got into comics. He was doing coloring I guess he was already in comics. He was doing coloring for Nintendo comics that Valiant was publishing. And Valiant was struggling, had to lay off a bunch of people. He was a new guy shown the door. So he had a little window, basically needed to get his rent together, puts together a portfolio and goes to get comic book work, as an illustrator, as a penciler. You don't hear that story that often, and I think the industry has changed now where you don't shop your portfolio to these publishers' offices the way that used to work. But it's kind of neat to hear him, like, buckling down and doing it. Like, what choice do you have? But a lot of guys didn't do it that way.
This is an aside, and I'll put a link in the show notes to the article. Might have been like more of like an oral history kind of piece or whatever. But before comics, and when he was just a kid in New York, high school student even, he worked at FAO Schwartz. And this is like 85, 86. The video game bust happens in 1984 when Atari just kind of gluts the market with ET cartridges and all this other games that just stink. Right. So video games are gone. And Nintendo tries to make a play in the American market. And the way that they started doing that is by going to the major markets like LA, New York. Nintendo of America comes to New York. They go to FAO Schwartz and they drop off like a Nintendo console, right? And the manager at FAO Schwartz gives it to one of the kids, man. Take home, play it, and see if this is worth selling. See if you like it. Is it worth having in our store? It was Joe Quesada who had like the earliest like Nintendo console with Super Mario Brothers, and the way he paints the story, man, it's like he gave the thumbs up to his manager at FAO Schwartz. The manager at FAO Schwartz gives a thumbs up to the Nintendo guys. They start selling them there in FAO Schwartz. They can't keep them on the shelves. 6 months later, they're at every Toys R Us. You know what I mean? Millions of these things have sold. So he's kind of like Forrest Gump.
That's cool, man.
Kind of character.
I've never heard that story. That's great. Other note I have is he cites Dark Knight Returns as being the big pivotal book that kind of led him to a career in comics.
The book that he's promoting too is he's going to be working on X-O Man-O-War number 0, man. So it's going to come up later, but we'll talk about it right now because it certainly looks fun.
Look at that gimmick cover, man. That is full on metal ink, whatever they could come up with.
If Very fun layouts. McFarlane inspired, I would say, like with just like the panel compositions and stuff.
Jimmy Palmiotti inking.
Yeah,
Those two
time.
had a long professional career together.
Yeah, they're a Midnight Express. Maybe they're the Beverly Brothers.
Hey, I thought of this looking at the Nightfall ad. This is Kelly Jones art.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly Jones, big Batman artist. You know, he's got an artist edition for it. Very stylized. It made me think of like McFarlane's Spider-Man. Kelly Jones' Batman is to McFarlane's Spider-Man.
I think that's a good call.
It was a different time period, and I don't think it sold the gangbusters or revolutionized the character the way McFarlane's Spider-Man kind of really reignited that character. But I think that has to do with a different time period. But he really pushes and accentuates certain cartoonish design elements in Batman in a way that we haven't seen. You know, it's a very unique take on that character, and one that has stuck around and become pretty iconic.
As we continue to see more ads, and when Bane shows up and you see these covers, you start to see the Sam Keith creep in there and stuff. It's really, really fun to watch, man.
It's such a great piece. It's such an awesome piece. I love it. Really great art. Jay Lee, you know, top of his powers, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Probably my favorite Jay Lee time period. The Hunkin' Babe has now returned from, I guess, that survey of, like, what do you want to see in the book?
So it's all your fault, Wizard readers.
Very disappointing. The Vampirilla Adam Hughes cover, probably one of the iconic Vampirilla images, and we're going to see Harris here in a couple pages, but calls to mind that.
The Understanding Comics ad, still a Tundra book at this point, man. If we ever have a Kayfabe shoot interview with Eastman, this is going to be one of my top questions, man.
I'd be curious to hear Scott McCloud weigh in on it. So, Brutes and Babes, the importance of structure. This whole article is essentially about arm muscles. Ridiculous. Just ridiculous.
We call that vamping.
Yeah, it's kind of a fill-in thing. And then he shows an example of the Dark cover, and dead center, a freaking arm. It's incredible. It's incredible to me what this whole column is just hard to believe.
Yeah, the column sings whenever we get to see submissions from Wizard readers, and we have his critiques, because the critiques are always valuable, but the lessons, man, not so much.
This is a funny column, though. It's incredible to me. It's just all arm muscles, and then it's like, this is how you show it. This is how you pay the rent with it.
All right, what's going to be probably the shortest Palmer's picks of our Wizard episodes, man, is do you actually? Holy fuck, people! Jim Rugg has Bean World comics. I've never seen one in my life. Okay, so you're gonna lead the charge on this, because I don't know anything about this besides his Larry Marder's involvement with Image,
which is noteworthy.
Yes.
So this episode is about Larry Marder. Bean World's his main comic. There's a note about how he took a job with a big distro or retailer to kind of like learn about the direct market and their communication with creators in an effort to basically learn how to sell more of his comics. Bean World was always a comic that I would hear about in this kind of reverential tone. It's very unusual as you see flipping through it. In a time of Spawn being the top comic, this is about as opposite as you can get. It's very basic, more symbol and icon than it is any kind of musculature or structure, as Bart Sears has just taught us. You know, these guys are stick figure arms, not exactly biceps. It almost defies description. So you have these characters that are called Beans, and this is basically their leader, Mr. Spook. They inhabit a certain reality. This is a perfect page for it. And where they live, they actually go through these different layers of reality to get to where they harvest their food from.
Yo, Larry Marder, man, what kind of drugs you be fucking with?
This is a strange comic, as everybody says, you know, because it is mixing these symbols. It's hard to imagine. There is, I can't remember if it's a quote or if it's actually in the Palmer's Pick episode that talks about how everybody that reads Bean World reads a different comic. Because all of these things are like symbolic and representative, but it's not clear what they're representing or exactly what they're referring to. And it mixes in religious concepts, meaning of life concepts. It's peculiar, man, graphically and as a story.
I don't know Larry Marder, man, but I think you might have got hold of some of that Timothy Leary shit.
It's a really interesting comic. And so this is a trade hardcover collection. There's also a trade paperback. This is Eclipse. I think it's noteworthy to mention them. We've kind of talked about how interesting of a publisher that was. And I didn't realize it until we keep going through this, but they seem to have their hands in everything. So they were the publisher. I actually have a single issue of Tales of the Bean World, number 21. So this is a long-running series, published somewhat infrequently. The article definitely notes that it did not sell well, so there aren't lots of these comics.
Yeah, I've never seen one in the wild because I only go through quarter bins. But usually, what you find in quarter bins are things that have sold, in hundreds of thousands.
It's a unique comic. It's cool that it's called out in Palmer's Picks because I think it's a comic worth some attention and a spotlight and showing the breadth of what was being published at this time period.
It was respected. Like a lot of these people, Dave Sim liked Larry Mortar, like Jeff Smith liked Larry Mortar.
There's no other comic like it. It's really great. From one of the strengths of comics, in my opinion, is unique voice.
Mm-hmm.
And few comics have as unique a voice as Tales from the Bean World. So it's very interesting in that regard. Larry Marder then takes this experience he gets working in distribution and working with comic book retailers and becomes the Image Comics publisher for a while.
Yeah, we'll get into that in the future, man.
So pretty interesting guy, and this is the first time I probably saw his name as a kid.
You saved it because I don't know much about Larry at all, man. But we should, before we split from the Palmer's Picks, we should talk about the reading list. Some of my favorite parts of Palmer's Picks, man. One of the top books on the docket, man. Duplex Planet Illustrated, man.
This comes out of a popular zine. David Greenberger, I think he's in the New England area, worked in retirement homes and did zines about this stuff. He would just interview patients. He, interacted, seemed to be very passionate and affectionate and compassionate towards these people that he was working with, and just did lots and lots of collecting, those interactions and sharing them, because the zine ran for 100 plus issues. And then they started to adapt them in comics. And the first time that I saw any kind of Duplex Planet was the first 8-ball comics. I think the first 10 issues. Dan Clowes would illustrate some of these interviews. And so this is an example. Greenberger would ask a bunch of these guys, just some question to start a conversation. In this case, what is the most important invention of the 20th century? And then he would just type out the answers. And so Dan Clowes, pretty simple comics, but very entertaining. I think one I remember was, what did George Washington's voice sound like?
Yeah.
So they were kind of like creative and abstract questions.
There's a Peter Bagg trade paperback that they're calling out here. We'll get into more Pete Bagg when Palmer's Picks covers Hate. The next hot thing, Harris Comics making strong effort to become a force in the comic world. Then we mentioned, I believe, in the Comics Journal issues that we did, that the parent company of Harris Publications, they publish Guitar World magazine, but Brian Cunningham here lays out that these motherfuckers publish 70 magazines. Like, holy crap.
Yeah, I bet they had a grim time in the early 2000s.
So, of course, they got a hold of the Warren catalog, which would be creepy, eerie, and, of course, the flagship title would be Vampirella. It started off at Dark Horse for a spell, and then Harris decided, there's enough money in this. We'll start publishing this shit ourselves. But kind of like continuity articles in earlier issues, this is just promos and talking about some of the things that are going to be coming out pretty soon. Yeah, they're going to start to fold in Uncle Creepy and Cousin Eerie into the thing. Is this Twister?
Serial killer hunts other serial killers.
I heard that before. And then, of course, there will be Kane, which is the David Quinn, Brian Stelfreeze cover, Hannibal King. No, not Hannibal King. That's one of the... is it Hannibal King?
I think it is Hannibal King. Interior artist, Hannibal King.
Okay, good. There was one of the Night Stalkers in the Midnight Suns. His name is Hannibal something.
Boy, now I'm second-guessing myself. They also mentioned Q Unit, which we saw the gigantic ad for. That was a book they pushed pretty hard, and they described it in here. It's very science fiction-based. So Deep Space, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Alien Legion, and one of their quotes is... the X-Men of the 90s.
It's always those X-Men. Look at that codpiece. This is like jockstrap technology in those 90s when I was in Little League. You just put this plastic thing on your junk, and man, you get hit with a grounder there, it's going to hurt your nutsack still.
They compare themselves to Marvel in the 60s. I think all of these companies want to sound good and exciting, and then they all compare themselves to Valiant and how they're going to be the next big thing. In this case, they're using Valiant had Western characters that they brought back.
Right, yeah.
And of course, Harris is bringing back Warren titles. So it's sort of like half nostalgia and also something new. We're going to hear this from a lot of companies.
Harris has a run
this next year.
Harris has a run for a while, though, man. They got a good almost 10-year run.
I see Kane a lot in these back issue bins. You say you see the comics that sold well or sold in big numbers or were ordered in big numbers. I see Kane in a lot of back. Saw it this week.
Religion and comics. So look at the relationship of two worlds that incorporate myth and legend.
Comics obviously have religious ties, mythology ties, references gods as origins and things. I don't know that there's anything too groundbreaking in this.
No.
One piece I pulled out is there's a little more information on the famous Swamp Thing Jesus storyline. I guess Swamp Thing was actually going to be the cross that Jesus was crucified on.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and who knows how accurate any of this is. But that was something I pulled out, kind of interesting. They say, Dave Sim invents his own religion in Cerebus, which I think proved to be not popular, not well received in Cerebus, let's say. Some of the later run of Cerebus, as he gets into those last 50 issues or so, is a lot of just reading scripture. Kind of tough to read in a comic book. A lot of conspiracy stuff looks at messages in pop culture. And so all of these religious things are often interpreted and kind of dissected that way.
I feel like the entire article is really just trying to build to the last paragraph where they describe superhero mythology as like the modern day tales of myth and legend. That's what they were trying to say in this very long-winded way, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I didn't pull too much out of it. Love this 2-page ads.
I do too. Like, they're both like, when you're a little kid and you're starting to learn to draw the 3/4 view of a face, a lot of people will they'll lean in one direction or the other. And that's what this made me think of, because it's like two of the same, like, it's almost like you could read this as a little kid, like, and then this guy has a hammer and then he turns into this guy.
I need Wizard to cover Larson's Savage Dragon soon, because I need to talk about this book.
We're going to see Ron Friends wearing this jacket a little bit later in this issue. Keep your eyes peeled. I don't think he has a little dangly Gregory Hines earring, though. Going for the Throat, Ron Wagner brings his own style to Morbius by Clifford Meth. I'm a Ron Wagner guy. I dug his comics. I'm a G.I. Joe cat. And, man, I really like him in here because he reminds me of me, man. He's not afraid to talk some shit. You know what I mean? If somebody's corny to him, he'll call him out. And that's precisely what he does here. Now Ron went to the Kubert School.
He cites Alex Toth, Gray Murrow, Neil Adams, and Joe Kubert as all being influences on him, and highlights Alex Toth, which I love anybody that wants to call out Alex Toth for some love, and describes what he likes about it as it's all design.
In earlier issues, probably I think even the last episode, we were talking about the Comics Code Authority and how it's becoming a little bit more impotent, a little bit more toothless. Ron Wagner says, yeah, that's not the case with Morbius. And then in the interview, we discover what the Comics Code has trouble with when it comes to his Morbius comics. And it's things like people fucking in crowd scenes and a theater marquee that's highlighting a movie called Anal Nuns.
These are great, though. Look at that face. Like, these are such good visuals. There's another great one in the article. It's. I think he had this image is in the article, and it's one of my favorites. Like, that's amazing.
So has that Kubert organic ink style right there, man. That unmistakable Janice Chang lettering.
He really trash talks the writer of the series, of the first several issues of the series, who then leaves the book, and Wizard gives him a chance to rebut it. But where I'm going with that is Ron Wagner had this idea of like violent, dark, sleazy comics, and it's very different than Len Kaminski, the writer who put this series together, I assume in the beginning. Different than what he had in mind. And that's tough. If you have two different ideas, the two creators working on a book, like somebody's going to win that, And
Ron Wagner would put in margin notes, cutting promos on the writer, and then the writer would give him a buzz, man, and Ron would never even pick up the call. A lot of spicy article. This is the first spicy article in all of Wizard, man.
Yeah.
You never get any real emotion. It's all media trained fucking promo shots, man. But like Wagner's like, yeah, man, the writer was whack. The writer was corny. It's all talking heads. I want violence. I want grit.
It's hard to argue with an image like that.
I agree.
For comics being image driven, especially at this time period, like he was trying to bring some fire.
You mentioned earlier how a big income stream for the cartoonists is the trading card phenomenon. God damn it, dude, I had no idea there were tribe trading cards, man. What next? Trencher trading cards? and it's an income stream for the creators. It's an income stream for artists because you're getting work for hire. So that's the gimmick that they would all pull. You know, it's like, okay, we'll have Madman trading cards and we'll get Frank Frazetta to draw one. The names listed here: Jay Lee, Kevin McGuire, Jill Thompson, Dwayne Turner, and many more. I hope Jill Thompson drew that one girl character. I want to see what that looks like. That's the only character I know from Tribe.
Going back through these Wizards, I've been surprised by how many trading card sets there are. Like, I remember, trading cards, Jim Lee X-Men trading cards. I remember some of these things. But, man, they just, like you said, there were cards for everything and stuff that makes no sense. Royal Family trading cards?
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Did you pull anything for Hollywood Heroes? There wasn't much in there for me to chew on.
Cadillacs and Dinosaurs animated is mentioned, so I pulled that because I think last issue we talked about, you don't get a lot of Xenozoic coverage.
In the Todd McFarlane interview with Gary Groth, he mentioned that he didn't understand why Marvel would only invest in issue 1s when they do promotion, and one of the things he wanted them to do is like promote issue 2 with the same fervor, produce issue 5 with the same fervor, and we have an ad here for Spawn number 14. So we have an example of Todd McFarlane putting his money where his mouth is. Probably the only issue in this thing that's for a new comic that is promoting an issue that's into the series. Of course, you see ads for X Factor 75 or whatever, but they're still promoting something new creative teams, new crossovers, whatever. But I really appreciate seeing Todd put his money where his mouth is.
That's a wild image, too.
Of course, Superman couldn't stay dead for too long, man. There will be a resurrection pretty soon, man. And eventually you'll see Shaquille O'Neal play this guy, but they never let him wear the S on the chest or have any mentions of a Metropolis or Lois Lane even. It's a real shit-ass movie, man.
I thought this was a Texas, Walker, Texas Ranger action figure when I first saw this.
Jim, that's because you're old as fuck, man, and you weren't there to get the Bob the Goon figure, which is on, this is a Brian Cunningham listicle about the worst figures in the history of action figuredom. Some of them are worth mentioning to just show an image on the screen, like this Thing figure from Mego, where if you ever seen this thing, the Mego figures, they have the fabric outfits or whatever, so they just have the Thing with the sculpted head and stuff, but the rock body is just a leotard with painted rocks on it. Lex Luthor, Toy Biz, looks eerily similar to a Jeff Bezos. And then some of these other ones are just nothing to me. But of course, the number one worst figure in the history of action figuredom, Bob the Goon, man. Another example of if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with, man. Because the movie was new. These toys came out before the goddamn flick, right? So the only ones that were available, Batman, Joker, and Bob the fucking Goon.
Love his haircut.
I know, Skullet. And this guy's a famous actor, friend of Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson hooked him, brought him into the thing and got him some likeness rights, got him some royalties. We always hear about the initial meetings that Vince McMahon has with trying to attract people to the company and telling them that, listen, Iron Sheik cashed a royalty check for his toy last month, $80,000. So this guy, whatever this douchebag's name was, he made a nice chunk of change because we all have fucking Bob the Goons. But you get this figure before the damn movie comes out. So you're bated breath, man. Oh shit, there he is. That's Bob the Goon. What's he going to do? He doesn't do. He ain't about much, man. And then you go home. See, that's why it's the worst, because we all invested emotion in this character, and then when you see the movie, he ain't about much. We'll put him there for the rest of this thing, man. Staring at the Kayfabe verse.
He looks very different without the hat.
He really does.
I did not confuse him with Chuck Norris once the hat comes off.
I don't know about Chuck Norris modern day, man. I think I see Ken doll hair in that head. Also, by the way, another one of the bad figures was Amigo Tarzan. Same deal. Skin-colored leotard outfit with what you would think of as Tarzan gear. So it's why have that piece of cloth? It's weird.
Singlet would have been his, right? Like a fur singlet.
Yeah, well, yeah, why not? It seems every issue they're showing off a new line of X-Men toys. And you know your homeboy had all of these. I could put them all up here, man, but I don't measure my penis by the fucking X-Men toys I have. Might as well pay homage to these custom figures, man.
That's a hell of a paint job on Union Jack.
And Morpheus. You know what? I gotta get that out of there. I can't be staring at fucking Bob the Goon. This is serious business.
Wizard of Cards. We usually don't talk about cards, but this is the Warriors of Plasma #0 card set. This is interesting because you'd get a binder for it, and whenever you arranged all the card set, it was a comic book. You know, like the cards were literally a comic, so almost be like a graphic novel or something, except very expensive and more costly than a comic. But I can kind of see how you get to this gimmick given the climate of the times.
You have to dig deeper in our episodes, man, to see what this gimmick cover looks like, because you get the most like spontaneous, guttural laughter from the both of us when we check this thing out, man. Fucking Shadowhawk has 2 sets of elbows in that arm. Almost like, what are those like 3-stick nunchuck things? You know what I'm talking about?
That'd be perfect for this Shadowhawk. That should be his weapon of choice.
Comic Watch, man. Iron Man number 121, first appearance of Rhodey. I took a look on eBay because I figured, Rhodey's a character in the movies, man. Like, what is that comic worth now? Maybe it's got to be worth something, man. About $10. And then Sandman number 8 is first appearance of Death. You could get it for about $25 now. Everything's stabilized, you know what I mean? Like, even when we go do quarter bin diving, man, I have to pick up Kabuki number 1 because of my Wizard coverage, you know what I mean? Because I've seen it, like, it's like, I can't pass this up.
Yeah, for sure. Crystal Ball, they talk about all of these new comics, superhero comics that are coming out, and they speculate years from now, we may look back on 1993 as the start of the third age of heroes, going Golden Age, Silver Age, this may be the third age. We look back much differently than they're prognosticating here. This is a very optimistic outcome because we look back on it on the beginning of the collapse of the comic industry as we know it.
Yeah, it's definitely a very historic time, and we look at it as, the speculator bubble. That's how it's known. I wonder if there is a third age. Ultimates?
I don't know. They talk about Bronze Age would be like that late 70s, 80s stuff.
Yeah, that's usually associated with issue 1 of Conan.
These aren't defined by like fanzine movements the way Golden and Silver Age are, so I don't know that the ages really keep going, beyond the Golden and Silver Age. I know they have some names, but I don't think they mean much.
Wildcats Trilogy 1, Jay Lee.
That's another one of those super mirror foil ink covers.
Yeah, it doesn't work so well, man. Like, it looks kind of good on screen, but with my own eyeballs.
You want to compare it with the Exo Zero? Who won the gimmick cover this month?
One thing that I noticed is, like, the structural integrity of this paper really sucks, man.
That's a difference. Like this, I don't know what this is, like plastic or something on the Exo cover. You can see it on the inside.
Yeah.
Whereas the Wildcats is paper of some sort.
Yeah. It's fucking nonsense. Some real good color in here, man. I think it's probably like, Joe Chiodo and like Steve Olive and Ruben Rude were like, and Kiko Taganashi. Actually, I could keep going. Never mind. I won't go down that rabbit hole.
We compared, some of the coloring that would be on Namor, which may have come out concurrently his last issue or so of Namor. It's a world away. It feels like it's 50 years difference in terms of color and what you're getting here on the glossy paper and the digital color.
Yeah. Still primo Jay Lee, man. He has his run with this kind of style.
These are good characters for Jay Lee and what I like about him and where he's at. Warrior women, dude in the mask and overcoat.
Warblade.
This is sort of the setup for him.
Oh, this is worth noting, man. Young Jeffrey Scott and Alex Gardner, man, with their Gen 13 characters.
The flip side, we're starting to see the talent searches now.
We are.
Computer color separators, top rates paid, and I bet they were. This is a time before every designer had their own Mac station. That was cutting edge.
Yeah,
look at that Deathmate black cover art, man. Good stuff.
All of this, man. It's like Gen 13 is coming, guys. Oh shit, they got Brett Booth on the board.
Brett Booth.
Jim is paying out some ducats. He must have got that. He must have got that new office space that's like 4,000 square feet, man. Because he's got these dudes on the docket, man.
Yeah, it's just full on. Like, look at the lineup. They are creating books as fast as they possibly can.
And look, it's called Gen X. It's before it's Gen 13. And I'm sure Marvel had a problem with that X right there, man. A bunch of teenagers, teenage mutants.
Boy, that's a good... It would have been a perfect title for that time period, Gen X being a pop piece of pop culture lexicon.
And Marvel uses it on their Chris Pachalo title. Now let me pull one out, man. Youngblood Yearbook 1. What's notable about it? This is early Chap Yap, man. The boy was 18, 19 years old, so don't you dare cut promos on my dude, because this is a very rough Chap Yap. He'll do this, then he'll do Youngblood number 5, and then he gets Team Youngblood, and then that's the Chap Yap that we fucking know and love, man. This is still very, very rough, man.
He gets so detailed in his hatching and stuff. You know, like all of these guys that would show up and they would sort of be a clone of either Liefeld or of Jim Lee, but they would become their own style as they went forward.
I had this one teacher at the Kubert school who hated seeing this kind of hatching, and he would be like, the hatching is so far apart you could drive a truck through the middle of it.
I like that's what he objects to. How about the insane triple lighting that you couldn't make a shadow there.
But you could see, like, just this stuff was drawn way earlier than this Chap Yap. Like, this is our Chap Yap here, who
that's
we're
the
super
Team
down with.
Youngblood I think of.
Yeah, Sentinel.
And then Warchild would have been maybe his apex.
Sure, yeah, and that's Maximum Press. We'll be getting into that.
I thought you were going to say that's Maximum Cross Hatching. Dave Johnson on Super Patriot, big fan of that stuff. Jason Pearson there.
Yep.
Oh, man. What's the opposite of cutting promos? Image is a Shadowhawk. Like,
so this is a good one.
This is my
man.
era.
I got this one for Christmas, I think. This month's number 1s.
All right, I brought quite a few of these. I don't know which ones we need to flip through. This is stupid number 1, Hilary Barda. This is Image parodying itself. I don't know if it's even worthy of a flip through. This is Trencher. We've talked about this quite a bit. This is Keith Giffen doing a style that I guess it's inspired partially by the coloring that was happening at the time. It's a very open line style. I feel bad for the colorist. I think this would be very impossible to figure out. This is art that I'll go online and look at originals because it's different, man. Nothing else looks like this.
You know, like I see shades of the British cartoon. Like it seems like Bisley had some influence. Now, I'm not saying it looks like Bisley, but it does look like something that I could imagine in like a Deadline or something.
I could see that. I think there's some Kevin O'Neill line work that you might reference. You know, it's not exists in a vacuum, but it was very unusual. And I think a big part was that coloring, you know, and trying to experiment with some of that coloring. Very interesting comics. Nothing else looks like that. Mike Grell, Shaman's Tears.
Yeah, there it is.
We've been talking about this. This is very much a part of that second wave of Image where a lot of guys showed up. Grell, a longtime monthly cartoonist, was able to like hit his deadlines and put out a lot of these.
You could tell this is probably what he intended for the cover, but Mike Grell's old school, and they were like, "No, my man, we're gonna sell you some books. Well, let's do this."
Monster Massacre. This is noteworthy for me primarily. There's a lot of interesting artists in it, but the very last story in this book is a Bisley piece, Maximum Force. It's one of my favorite Bisley comics, and it's orangutans and violence and metal hitting flesh and kind of everything I like about Bisley. It's very much superhero, or at least as superhero as he gets. This has been reprinted in a few different places, including a Maximum Force comic. And then finally, and save the best for last here, Mobius's Airtight Garage, published in a comic book format by Epic, by Marvel. Mobius has been hard to get in the States at different time periods. Epic printed several graphic novels by Mobius. This was one that was more accessible to me. Those graphic novels are hard to come by. It's Mobius, this is one of the great comic book artists, and for whatever reason, not that easy to get his work here in America. So you take what you can get, and pretty mind-blowing stuff. And you can see the format, with these big margins on the top and the bottom. He's coming out of that French bande dessinée format, the albums.
This was printed in Metal Hurlant. Like, this is serialized. All of these comics were serialized in heavy metal. So it's that square format. Mm-hmm. Read more BD.
There you go. Nice to see Mobius, even if it's just for a line in Wizard.
Shocking upset, man. The Moki Brothers win. The Moki Brothers win, man. April 1993, top 100. Jim, I ask you, how many Marvel books are in the top 100?
This is amazing. 1 year from Image starting, and now there are 0 Marvel books in the top 10. Wow. Are heads rolling at Marvel or what?
6. Count them, 6. More than 50% of them or DC books.
The funny part about this is the Return of Superman storyline, right? First they kill Superman and get the #1 spot. Now they bring back Superman and get the top 6 spots. And both times they blocked Valiant from that #1 spot because the top book that's not DC here, Turok Dinosaur Hunter #1. Last time it was Bloodshot #1. If you're Valiant, man, how pissed off must you be? I kind of got to cheer for DC on this one.
They were smart, man. We saw the ad back there. And like, not only do you bring Superman back, you bring back 5 Supermen, and you introduce them all in their own comic. Yeah, you're going to get on that top spot. Like, market manipulation to a T, man.
Christmas bonuses for Mike Carlin this year. Wizard's starting to register in the pie charts now 3% of the dollar share of the market. Man, that's massive.
Massive. It's about like $10 to $15 million a month.
Especially when you consider they're publishing one book, maybe a book and a half a month, considering their special issues. Man, they are selling huge volume of these magazines.
Garrett's doing all right.
And $4 a pop.
Yep.
Twice the cost of your average comic book. Headshots in these are ridiculous.
Like, we have Mark Pasella here, and we would call him like a Gilberg of like a Jim Lee. But aesthetically, he's like a Gilberg of Matt Wagner.
Oh, interesting.
This is a wannabe mage looking dude with the dangle earring and all that stuff. Ready to see the Thunderstrike coat?
Bring it on.
Boom! He even has the Thunderstrike mullet.
I never know what anybody looks like. Usually it's people on podcasts, but in this case it's Cartoonist. Dan Jurgens, I had no idea that. I wouldn't have picked him out of a lineup.
Something ain't right, because I was on a panel with him not too long ago. Now this character right here, the face is Dan Jurgens for sure. But I'm saying, like, this looks like a certain Bill Griffith character, if I've ever seen one. And he didn't look like that when I saw him in person, man. So there's some Photoshop done on the top or something, man. Next time you see us in this configuration, we're going to be covering Wizard Magazine, number 23, Image of Valiant. Behind the scenes, we'll be talking Deathmate, I believe.
Dark Horse with their new superhero universe line. I'm excited to get into that.
And we're going to jump headfirst into some more extensive Vertigo coverage, which we surprisingly haven't had very much of in these previous Wizard episodes, man. So catch us with new episodes every Monday. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. After you subscribe, it'll let you know whenever we post a new video live.
You can support Cartoonist Kayfabe through our merch shop at Spreadshop. We're constantly posting new designs for t-shirts, mugs, hats, and you can find the link below this video.
We also have a P.O. Box that we can promote. Send us your doubles. P.O. Box 3071, Munhall, Pennsylvania 15120. That link is in the description as well, man. So Jim and I have to get back. We have comics to make, man. You guys know what your marching orders are.
Read more comics.